much of the country. So it is notable that the TSA expects an 11% bump over last year.
Imagine paying a very high cost for a gallon of petrol. Sounds crazy, right? Well, that's what you might have to do by the end of this month. Petrol prices are skyrocketing in 2023 and are expected to reach record highs in September. Why is this happening? And what can you do about it? In this video, we will tell you everything you need to know about the petrol price crisis and how to survive it. The global oil market is the first factor driving up petrol prices. As you may know, oil is the main raw material for producing petrol and other refined products. The balance between supply and demand, geopolitical events, and market speculation determines oil prices. In 2023, we have seen a combination of factors that have reduced oil supply and increased oil demand, leading to higher oil prices. On the supply side, one of the biggest disruptions was caused by Hurricane Idalia, which hit Florida and the east coast of the U.S. in late August 2023. The storm damaged several oil refineries, pipelines, and offshore oil platforms in the Gulf of Mexico. This reduced the U.S. oil production and refining capacity by about 10%, creating a shortage of petrol and other fuels in the domestic market. The U.S. had to import more oil from other countries to meet its demand, pushing the global oil price. Another factor that affected the oil supply was the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which escalated in early 2023. Russia is one of the world's largest oil producers and exporters, supplying about 30% of Europe's oil needs. However, after Russia invaded Ukraine in January 2023, many European countries imposed sanctions on Russia and reduced their oil imports. This created a gap in the European oil market, which had to be filled by other sources, such as Saudi Arabia and Norway. This also increased the global demand and price of oil. On the demand side, one of the main drivers was the economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. As more countries lifted their lockdowns and restrictions, people started to travel domestically and internationally. This increased the consumption of petrol and other fuels, especially in emerging markets like China and India. According to the International Energy Agency, IEA, global oil demand is expected to grow by 4% in 2023, reaching pre-pandemic levels by the end of the year. Another factor that boosted oil demand was the extreme weather conditions in many parts of the world in 2023. For example, Europe experienced a severe heat wave in July 2023, which increased the use of air conditioning and electricity generation. Similarly, China faced a series of floods and typhoons in August 2023, which disrupted its coal production and power supply. These events increased the demand for oil as an alternative energy source, adding more pressure on the oil market. The second factor that is influencing petrol prices is the refining process. As I mentioned earlier, oil is not directly used as vehicle fuel. It has to be refined into different products, such as petrol, diesel, jet fuel, etc. The difference between the price of crude oil and refined products is called the crack spread. The crack spread depends on factors such as refinery capacity, inventory levels, seasonal demand patterns, environmental regulations, etc. In 2023, we have seen a significant increase in crack spreads for petrol and other fuels. This means that refineries profit more from turning crude oil into refined products. One of the reasons for this is that there is a mismatch between the supply and demand of different types of crude oil. Most refineries in the U.S. are designed to process heavy sour crude oil with a high sulfur content and low quality. However, most of the new oil production in the U.S. comes from shale formations, which produce light, sweet crude oil with low sulfur content and high quality. This creates a surplus of light sweet crude oil and a heavy sour crude oil shortage in the U.S. market. To cope with this situation, some refineries have invested in upgrading their facilities to process light, sweet crude oil more efficiently. However, this requires a lot of capital and time, and not all refineries can afford it. Therefore, some refineries have to buy heavy, sour crude oil from other countries at a higher price, or sell their light, sweet crude oil at a lower price to balance their operations. This increases their production costs and reduces their profit margins. Another reason for the higher crack spreads is an increasing demand for cleaner fuels that meet stricter environmental standards. For example, in 2020, the International Maritime Organization, IMO, implemented a new regulation that required ships to use low-sulfur fuel or install scrubbers to reduce their emissions. This increased the demand for low-sulfur diesel and reduced the demand for high-sulfur fuel oil. Similarly, in 2022, India implemented Bharat Stage 6, BS6 emission norms that required vehicles to use ultra-low sulfur petrol and diesel. This increased the demand for high-quality refined products and reduced the demand for low-quality ones. To meet these requirements, refineries must invest in more complex and expensive processes to remove sulfur and other impurities from crude oil and refined products. This also increases their production costs and reduces their profit margins. However, since the demand for cleaner fuels is high, refineries can charge a higher price for them and increase their crack spreads. The third factor that affects petrol prices is the taxation and regulation by the government. As you may know, petrol is one of India's most heavily taxed commodities. The central government levies an excise duty on petrol, a fixed amount per liter. The state governments levy a value-added tax, VAT, on petrol, a percentage of the final price. The central and state governments also charge other fees and cesses on petrol, such as road and infrastructure cess, special additional excise duty, etc. In 2023, we have seen a significant increase in the taxes and charges on petrol by both the central and state governments. One of the reasons for this is that the government needs to raise more revenue to fund its fiscal deficit and expenditure programs. The COVID-19 pandemic has severely affected the Indian economy and reduced the government's income from other sources, such as income tax, corporate tax, goods and services tax, GST, etc. Therefore, the government has resorted to increasing the taxes on petrol and other fuels, which are easy to collect and have a high elasticity of demand. These are some of the main factors that affect petrol prices in India. As you can see, many complex and interrelated factors determine how much you pay for a liter of petrol at your nearest fuel station. I hope this helps you understand why petrol prices are so high in India. To cope with rising petrol prices, you can compare prices, plan, drive smart, use public transportation, switch to alternative fuels, and reduce your carbon footprint. These are some ways you can deal with the rising petrol prices. We hope you found this video helpful and informative. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more videos. Thank you for watching and see you next time.